The Emissary, Dax, the Negus, Duet, and In the Hands of the Prophets. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Seventh Rule with Cirroc Lofton.
Hello, hello.
My name is Ryan T. Husk, and today we are doing a review of Deep Space Nine Season 1. And everybody's like, what, the entire season? Yes, the entire season. This is kind of a retrospective because this is almost 3 years after we did Season 1. But now we're going back and we are going to drop this in so that you have a full experience. Every single episode reviewed and every single season reviewed. How you doing, Cirroc? This is fun.
Doing great. Doing great. How about you?
I'm excited for this. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. Honestly, this is going to be really cool. I'm wearing my Quarks shirt because I feel like during Season 1, when we're reviewing Season 1, I was very proud of this shirt. I feel like I wore this shirt 2 or 3 times going, hey, I'm wearing Quarks today. And then Aron will be talking about Aron Eisenberg a lot, who played Nog and who started this show. He was always like, yeah, Ryan, we know you wore that one already. And I'm like, really? I thought this was the first. No, it's like the 3rd time, Ryan. He'd always call me out on that.
Yeah, he was the best at calling people out. Obviously, you mentioned, talking about Aron and how special he is to us. And, really the journey of watching these shows begins here in the first season and with this inspiration of rewatching DS9. So that's really one of the major attachments that I have to the memory of the beginning of watching this show and kind of starting this journey is Aron, kind of my buddy Nog pushing me to get back in the No J consortium. And so
yeah,
that's a special thing for me.
Yeah, that's why I'm most excited about this first season, is because Aron was with us not only for 16 episodes, or like it was 15 episodes of Discovery, 1 episode of the Orville, and then at our 17th episode, we started Deep Space Nine. And so and Aron was with us for all 19 episodes of Season 1. And then everybody knows he passed away the day before we started recording Season 2. So we obviously took an extended break there and continued on with Malissa Longo, Aron's widow. So this entire season is like going to be the memories of, we'll be like, oh, I remember that episode. But I think more than anything, we're just going to remember, all the hijinks and all the razzing that Aron did to us. Like, he would be like virtually pulling our underwear over our heads. You know what I mean? He was doing atomic wedgies on us virtually through Zoom.
Yeah, and just the energy that he brings, that's one of the things that's so infectious about Aron's personality is his energy. The jokes and the laughs, that's part of it, but it's really just the positivity. It's the kind of camaraderie that he builds with you. All of that means so much in kind of how he builds his relationships. And I remember, that being one of the biggest motivations for me to be involved with doing this and trying to get involved with it, because I knew that his heart was in the right place and that he would bring, not just the comedy aspect, but really a sincere kind of critique about what he was observing on the shows.
Yeah, very passionate, yeah. Very observant, very inquisitive. So I think we can get into this, and Aron's going to be with us the whole time. We're gonna hear him laughing at us. We're gonna see him flipping us off. So everybody at home, come join the ride as we talk about Deep Space Nine, Season 1. The first review episode, we actually did it. It aired May 6th, 2019. Actually, originally we had Jared Cooper with us for the first 16 episodes. He was no longer with the show starting right here. So this was like a new era with just you, myself, and Aaron. And then we did all of season 1. So it was a fun time. We were just an infant little podcast, giggling around and having fun. So episode 1 was The Emissary. And I remember my first thought, first of all, I still think The Emissary is the best pilot of any Star Trek series ever. I think that's how I feel about it. I feel pretty strongly about it. I feel like it's pretty solid. And it also won Best Pilot in a Legacy Series at the 2022 Lappy Awards by Virtual TrekCon. And all of the voters, I guess it wasn't by us, it was the voters that actually voted that. We didn't pick that, but I had a feeling it might win. Do you remember anything about that first episode? You and Dad fishing on the dock?
Fishing on the dock of the bay.
That's the one.
Yes, I do remember. So it was the first time Avery and I worked together, and this was the beginning of our relationship, and it was so easy. That was one of the things, the level of comfort that I felt, and the ease at which everything was done. Mm-hmm. I felt really comfortable, and the fact that we were at this outdoor setting on this ranch, I believe it was at the Disney Ranch, if I'm not mistaken.
Where's that?
I was like 12, so I wasn't the one driving. So, but I'm not sure exactly.
I wanted to ask you though, was that the first scene you shot with Avery? Do you remember if that was like your first scene shooting?
Yeah, that was the first scene.
Really?
Yeah, the first scene was that day, and it was an outdoors, place. I had never been fishing before. That was kind of that was my acting right there. It was acting like I knew what I was doing because I had never been fishing before, and so that was just the idea of it was fun for me, even though I wasn't really fishing. It just
Oh, we lost you for a second there, Cirroc. That's too bad.
Can you hear me?
Now we can, yeah. Which is too bad because it sounded like you were going off on a really good story, and then you just got quiet for a few seconds there.
Oh man, no, I was talking about fishing and just being out there and enjoying the outdoors. Avery made me feel so comfortable, and the director David Carson was, he knew what he was doing. He stayed out of the way. He made me feel at ease. The lighting was great. I felt that the whole moment was a special moment.
Yeah. That first episode. Oh, and by the way, you're back here. There you are. There you are. Everybody listening in. In my background, I've got the cast, but my chair is kind of blocking Cirroc's face, which is very rude of me. But I don't know. When you watch that first episode, and Star Trek's good at this, it's like you know what the show is about. After that first episode, you're like, okay, I get it. Here's my crew. Here's their situation. With Voyager, we know very clearly what's the mission. Their mission now is that they need to come home back to the Alpha Quadrant. Deep Space Nine, we get it. We know where they are. Enterprise, we get it after the first episode. And this one was probably the best of the lot, in my opinion. Introduces some very different and interesting characters. But that was the first episode, entitled Emissary. God, I could talk about that one forever. Really loved it.
There's a lot to talk about. I mean, just the fact that Jennifer Sisko dies in the beginning, and you start with that level of tragedy, and the stakes are raised to that level. You see Sisko challenging Picard, and him essentially telling him to, go pound sand, to put it mildly. And it was a lot of conflict there, and they really set the stakes really high. Yeah. They also gave us, they set the stage for what would eventually be one of the greatest ensembles in television, which is
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, this station in which they would introduce all of these wonderful characters. We were essentially biting on the hook in this first episode as the audience, as far as what the story would be and what the premise was, like as you discussed.
Yeah, really just a very interesting and different ensemble cast than what Star Trek fans were used to from the original series and Next Generation. And that aired January 3rd, 1993. So just the soonest they could possibly do it in 1993. The second episode was called Past Prologue. Tana Loss, a former Bajoran terrorist during the occupation, asks Sisko for asylum on Deep Space Nine. Meanwhile, the station's last Cardassian inhabitant, Garrick, possibly a former spy for the Cardassian government, proves an interesting mystery to Bashir. So this is when we are finally introduced to Garrick. I say finally, it's the second episode, but
well, the third technically, but yeah.
Right. And so he's, we're introduced to him, he's introduced to Bashir, and we are introduced to that friendship there, or that weird, tug and pull that they have during their lunches. But then that kind of disappeared later on into Bashir and O'Brien. And that's too bad, because I would have liked to see more Bashir and Garrick.
I would have too, because I like the back and forth between the two of them. I thought it was just great. But Garrick, in this introduction of his character is one of the biggest mysteries of this show. And he starts off as a mystery in this episode. So he's so good at words. He's so playful, but he's also very suspicious and very in tune with what's happening on the station. So his observation skills are out of this world. But I just love that they have a character like Garrick, who is, kind of an inside man into the Cardassians and their occupation, and giving us some of a connection to that backstory as well.
Yeah, it was a brilliant idea to have a Cardassian, because Deep Space Nine already brought in a Ferengi, which is, look, Next Generation had a Klingon, and that was their big, bold move, right? Deep Space Nine had a Ferengi. You think that's their big, bold move, but then they're like, let's also get a Cardassian. So, I mean, like, they're really trying to show more perspectives. There's the Federation, there are the Bajorans. Now we have the Ferengi, we have a Cardassian. You know what I mean? Like, they're showing so much more. And when we're introduced to Garrick, we're just like, whoa, this is cool. How many more perspectives are we going to get? And everybody's just falling in love with Garrick. I can't imagine anybody doesn't like him.
And what he also becomes kind of reminds you of is, or reminds me of, is that sometimes we have very general stereotypes of people based on their place of origin, right? So you're like, those people in Germany, they're all a bunch of, so it's like you have a certain stereotype based on whatever historical facts or whatever your bias has leaned towards as far as your upbringing. It's always, those people are like this, whatever that like this is. Mm-hmm. And ultimately what we see in real life as well as in this show is that people are much more dynamic than that, and there's so much contextual layer to who people are and what people, countries are made up of, this very varied opinions and people having their own perspectives. And I think that's another thing that Garrick offers for the Cardassians, something different. It's not just like he's a yes man who follows in the totem pole, but he's actually has a guy, his own mind, his own motivations.
Right. And those stereotypes just don't always work, except for French people are snobs. That is fact check verified. No, I'm just kidding. French people, I love you. I'm French, so I'm allowed to make that joke. They're not all snobby, I've found. In fact, I found them to be extremely hospitable. But I'm one of them when I go visit friends. So maybe, so I don't know. It might just be that like, oh, he's one of us, he's family, and then if you show up with an American accent or speaking American, they're like, fuck this guy. But who knows? The world may never know. Are French snobs or aren't they? I don't know. I say no.
No.
The third episode.
But you understand what I mean about that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, it gives you a whole new insight into the Cardassians.
Yeah, no, totally. Which is something that we were all thirsting for anyway, because they're such an interesting race. They might be my favorite Star Trek alien race because they're so interesting and they're so devious and poetic and sinister and complex. It's a really, really interesting race. So the third episode was called A Man Alone. Ibadan, a criminal Odo has dealt with before, returns to Deep Space Nine, only to be murdered shortly after, leaving Odo to be the prime suspect. God, this feels like forever ago. Jake and Nog's troublemaking prompt Keiko to do something helpful for the station's children. I believe this is when she opened up the school, right?
Yep.
And you and Nog were like two of the 8 or 9, students on the whole station, right?
Yeah, and it was funny because when I remember in the classroom, how the classroom had basically every age of kid that you could. It's like he's 30 years old and this kid's like 6 months. You're like, I was like, this is, what kind of learning is this? There's no levels, there's no grade levels.
I know. But that's, I guess, what can you do other than get more teachers? But yeah, if you only have one teacher, then they got to cover everything. But like, what do you, you could teach certain lessons, stories that kind of work, for most ages. But once you start getting into anything complex like math or sentence structure or just language, you don't need to learn the IOUs and the ABCs and all that kind of stuff. You don't need to learn, how to do an outline of your hand and turn it into a turkey.
Right.
Exactly. And on the other side of that, a 5-year-old is going to get lost if you even mention geometry or the most simple of non-arithmetic, mathematics.
So let me ask you, because I don't remember exactly, but it felt like they decided, no, this is not the way we want to go with Keiko, because eventually we see that she becomes a botanist and goes off and she's like on other planets, right?
Yeah. And I don't remember exactly when that happened. I feel like it happened maybe around the 3rd season or something like that.
Right.
But I think it would have been cool had she remained the teacher, because then you could have storylines between Keiko and Nog and Jake, who dominated Deep Space Nine in the non-appearance mentions department. You know what I mean? Like, rather than getting non-appearance mentions, you could actually have, storylines. Then Molly kind of starts going, and there could be, another kid that joins in because somebody else is coming. That could be like a B plot if there's a character that comes on the station and they're the A plot, but then their kid is there too, or whatever. There's all kinds of stuff that could have been done, but I feel like, I guess they did after 2 or 3 stories or plots with it, they're like, yeah, moving on.
They were like, blow up the school. Didn't they blow up the school? Blow it up.
Yep.
So yeah, basically.
So the next one was, and I never know how to pronounce this. Some people pronounce it Babel, other people pronounce it Babel. The crew and civilian population of Deep Space Nine begin to speak gibberish when a plague, an aphasia virus engineered by the Bajorans as a weapon against the Cardassians, accidentally gets released into the station's atmosphere. Now, this one was directed by Paul Lynch. And I was wondering, do you remember anything about Paul Lynch? Because I don't remember mentioning his name very often.
That's a very good question. I do remember his name because obviously worked with him.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to remember like his face, and that's something I'm going to try to look into right quick.
Okay, so he did do 5 episodes. He did A Man Alone. Oh, so he did the episode just right before too. So A Man Alone, Babel, Q-less, The Passenger, and Battle Lines, all in the first season. So that's what it is. He did 5 episodes, all in the first season, and then moved on to other things because he's got a very storied career after that, but no other Star Trek. He did Next Generation.
Oh, yeah.
Looks like he did 5 episodes of Next Generation as well.
Yeah, I remember Paul now that I see him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And he did a lot of the first season episodes.
Yeah.
But I just can't remember like any kind of personal conversations that we had outside of just, I remember working with him.
Yeah, it was just an interesting thought because, I don't remember mentioning his name, but that's because it was all in the first season. And remember, Aron Eisenberg was the one that would always say, who was the director? Did you notice what the director did? Did you notice who the director was? And I don't think we started mentioning the director right away until Aron kept bringing it up and mentioning it. And I think I remember Aron saying we should mention the director every time, and the writers as well, because he was always interested in that kind of stuff. He was always interested in the shots and who is this and who is that. So maybe that's why I don't remember Paul Lynch's name. Is probably because maybe I wasn't reading off who the director was in the first and second seasons.
Yeah, you're right. We didn't. As a matter of fact, one thing that I noticed along that same vein was the first episode, the pilot episode, was written by Rick Berman and Michael Piller. And I don't remember seeing Rick Berman, his name come up again as with a story by credit other than the pilot episode.
Right. They were just always created by kind of stuff.
Right.
But then seemed to be a little bit more hands off. Now, Michael Piller wrote the script for this next one, episode 5, Captive Pursuit. And I don't know if he wrote that many, but this might be again that we didn't mention it the first couple seasons. But Michael Piller wrote this one. For the first time, an alien comes from the other side of the wormhole. He has ship trouble and seems very reluctant to accept any help. Chief O'Brien quickly finds out he has a secret. I believe, yes, this is with Tosk and Hunter of Tosk. To me, one of the most memorable first season episodes, maybe second most memorable or third, because it's so clear. We remember Tosk, played by Scott McDonald, who was also in the Voyager pilot as some lieutenant or something. And he's the guy, he's just got like this full scale, like, reptilian mask, and he's being chased by a similar looking alien, but it's more pale face rather than greenish, yellowish. And O'Brien tries to help him, and Tosk basically says, hey, my whole DNA is to be the hunted. This is what I want to be. This is what I am. And O'Brien's basically like, okay, Godspeed. But that was a fun one. I don't know if you remember it too well, but that was one that stuck with me for sure.
Yeah, I do remember that. It's along the lines of just, like accepting who somebody is. And, it's like he didn't want any help. He didn't want it to be changed. He's saying, this is who I am, essentially. And so, yeah, I do remember that. And this is also essentially, even with a few of these previous episodes that we're talking about, these stories of morality are popping up, right? Of what to do in situations, or what's right or what's wrong, or should I intervene or not intervene? And so we started to get these kinds of stories that became very indicative of what Deep Space Nine is all about.
Yeah, very early on, they were already starting with these, which was great.
Right.
The next one on the other side of that spectrum was called Q-less. Q, the Enterprise D's consistent omnipotent annoyance, comes to harass, or as Picard would say, harass. I don't know if he said Harris, but it seems like he would. The Deep Space Nine crew when his traveling companion, Vash, refuses to travel with Q any longer. So this was kind of fun because we see Vash again, and we see Q, and he gives the famous line, "You hit me. Picard never hit me." And Sisko says, "I'm not Picard." So that was a fun one. That's a very famous scene right there among Star Trek fans.
Yeah, this one doesn't jump out as something that's so memorable for me.
Paul Lynch directed it, and the time I was talking about was when Q and Sisko were boxing. He set up like an old time boxing match, like, "Hey, come on, you!" That was the moment.
Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, not a ton to say about that one. That was more, I feel like, a nod for Next Generation fans to see some old favorites, you know? The next one, speaking of favorites, is Dax. Jadzia Dax is accused of murder that her previous host, Curzon, supposedly committed. Director David Carson. This was an interesting one because we get our first real glimpse into her past lives, Jadzia's past lives, and what a Trill is with a symbiont.
Yes, we do. And again, we get into this idea about whether you're responsible for something that someone did in the past, even if that someone is kind of you. But it began this gray area about what was the right thing to do in the way of the Trill, right? Because she had the symbiont inside her, because that symbiont was responsible, Curzon was responsible for this murder. Was she therefore punishable for that, even though she's a separate being?
Which is a totally different situation. We've never run into that for obvious reasons. But that's one of the great things about Star Trek is they present something you have never thought about. Sometimes they present something as an allegory to something else, but sometimes they're just like, here's a morality play, and it's kind of a Rorschach test. It's kind of like how you view it is more a reflection of who you are as a person, more so than a reflection of the actual person or situation that you're talking about. It's a really interesting one.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, there's no really opportunity to talk about this. I guess you talk about it now in the sense of whether people's ancestors, whether you have to pay for your ancestral mistakes, right?
Yeah.
And people's descendants should or should not be accountable for those things. And so those kinds of debate are made today in that kind of a way about responsibility and slavery, for example. But they used it in this sense with somebody who has a symbiont inside of them. And I thought it was a very interesting discussion for, what is right and what is wrong, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Before we go to our break, I knew I was going to forget to mention this, but episode 6, though this previous episode, Mark Zicree was our guest, writer-producer Mark Zicree. He's written a couple episodes for Deep Space Nine. Of course, he got a writing credit on Far Beyond the Stars. He also wrote Next Generation episode First Contact, which is a very memorable one for me. Riker becomes a Malkorian. And episode 4, our guest was the one and only Quark himself, Armin Shimmerman. So that was the first time Armin graced our show, and we were better humans because of it. So let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back with the rest of season 1 on the other side. We'll be right back.